Marcus Chan had always been a simple man with simple pleasures. After 20 years working the asteroid mining rigs in the outer colonies, he'd saved enough to buy a small homestead on the frontier planet of Kepler 442b. The planet was mostly unexplored wilderness, which suited him perfectly. He wanted peace, quiet, and a chance to grow his own food after decades of eating synthetic rations. His modest cabin sat in a clearing surrounded by towering blue-leafed trees that swayed in the alien breeze. Marcus had spent 3 months building solar panels, setting up water collectors, and planting his first crops. Life was good, predictable, and wonderfully boring. That changed on a Tuesday morning when he heard the crash. Marcus was tending to his tomato plants when a thunderous roar split the sky above. He looked up to see a sleek silver spacecraft streaking overhead, trailing smoke and sparks. The ship was clearly in distress, wobbling unsteadily as it fought to maintain altitude. With a final desperate maneuver, it disappeared beyond the tree line, followed by the earth-shaking sound of impact. For a moment, Marcus stood frozen, dirt still clinging to his hands. First contact protocols flashed through his mind from his old colonial defense training. Report immediately. Maintain safe distance. Wait for authorities. But the nearest colonial outpost was 3 days away by comm relay, and whoever was in that ship might not have 3 days. Marcus grabbed his medical kit and emergency supplies, then climbed into his old hover truck. The crash site wasn't hard to find. A long scar of burned earth and broken trees led to where the alien ship had come to rest against a massive boulder. The vessel was unlike anything in human design, all flowing curves and organic shapes that seemed to blend technology with art. As he approached, Marcus could see that the ship's hull had been breached in multiple places. Scorch marks covered the exterior, and some of the damage looked deliberate. This wasn't just a crash, it was the result of combat. He circled the wreckage carefully, calling out in Universal Standard, the common trade language used throughout known space. No response came from within. Using a pry bar from his truck, Marcus managed to force open what appeared to be an emergency hatch. The interior of the ship was dimly lit by failing emergency lights. Strange symbols glowed weakly on control panels, and the air carried an odd metallic scent. Marcus followed a narrow corridor toward what seemed to be the main cabin, stepping carefully over debris and fallen panels. That's when he found her. The alien was clearly female, though her species was unlike anything in the databases Marcus remembered from his mining days. She resembled a large feline, easily 7 feet tall even lying down. Her fur was a deep midnight blue with silver stripes that seemed to shimmer in the emergency lighting. She wore what appeared to be military armor, though much of it was cracked and damaged. Most alarming was the blood. A lot of it. Dark purple stains covered her left side, and her breathing was shallow and labored. Her eyes, a striking golden amber, flickered open as Marcus approached. For a moment they stared at each other across the vast gulf of species and understanding. Then her hand moved weakly toward a weapon at her side. Marcus slowly raised his hands, showing they were empty. He pointed to his medical kit, then to her wounds, trying to communicate his intentions through gestures. The alien studied him for long moments, her predatory gaze taking in every detail. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her, because her hand fell away from the weapon. Working quickly but carefully, Marcus examined her injuries. 3 deep lacerations ran along her left side, likely from some kind of energy weapon. The wounds were severe but not immediately fatal if treated properly. Using his basic field medicine training, he cleaned and sealed the wounds with biofoam, then set up a portable IV to replace lost fluids. The alien watched his every move with intelligent eyes. When he offered her water from his canteen, she accepted it gratefully. When he tried to make her more comfortable by adjusting her position, she allowed it without resistance. There was something deeply dignified about her, even in her weakened state. As Marcus worked, he noticed details that spoke of a warrior's life. Scars crisscrossed her arms and shoulders, old wounds that had healed into silver lines against her blue fur. Her armor, though damaged, was clearly of high quality and bore intricate markings that might have been rank insignia or unit identifiers. But what struck him most was the sadness in her eyes. This wasn't just physical pain he was seeing. This was the look of someone who had been betrayed, abandoned, left to die by those she had trusted. Night was falling by the time Marcus finished treating her wounds. He couldn't move her safely in the dark, and her condition was still critical. Using materials from his truck and the crashed ship, he rigged up a temporary shelter around the wreckage. He started a small fire for warmth and opened a can of his emergency rations. The alien watched him eat, her nose twitching at the smell of the food. On impulse, Marcus offered her some. She sniffed it cautiously, then took a small bite. Her eyes widened slightly at the taste, and she accepted more when he offered it. As they shared the simple meal in comfortable silence, Marcus couldn't help but think about the strange turn his quiet retirement had taken. Yesterday, his biggest concern was whether his corn would grow properly in the alien soil. Tonight, he was providing aid to a wounded warrior from the stars with no idea what tomorrow would bring. The alien's breathing had steadied, and some color had returned to her golden eyes. Whatever species she was clearly tough. Marcus settled down near the fire, close enough to monitor her condition but far enough to respect her space. Before he drifted off to sleep, he saw her watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. There was gratitude there, certainly, but also something deeper. Something that spoke of honor and debts that demanded payment. Marcus had no way of knowing that his simple act of compassion had just changed the course of interstellar politics. All he knew was that someone had needed help, and he had provided it. In the morning, he would continue caring for his unexpected patient and hope that help would arrive soon. What he couldn't know was that help was already on the way, traveling faster than light across the void between stars, and it was bringing the most powerful fleet in known space. Marcus woke to the sound of his patient moving around inside the makeshift shelter. Dawn was breaking through the canopy of blue leaves, casting strange shadows across the crash site. When he peered inside, he found the alien sitting up, examining her bandages with careful attention. She looked much better than the night before. Her golden eyes were clearer, and she moved with the controlled grace of someone accustomed to combat. When she saw Marcus, she nodded once, a gesture that seemed universal in its meaning. Over the next few days, a routine developed between them. Marcus would check her wounds each morning, changing bandages and monitoring her recovery. She healed remarkably fast, faster than any human would have. By the third day, she was moving around the shelter with only slight stiffness. Communication proved challenging but not impossible. Through gestures, drawings in the dirt, and careful observation, they began to understand each other. Marcus learned that her name was something like Zarathek, though his human vocal cords couldn't quite manage the subtle growls and purrs of her language. She seemed amused by his attempts and settled for him calling her Zara. In return, she learned his name and that he lived alone on this world. Her ears, mobile and expressive like a cat's, would swivel toward him when he spoke. She seemed fascinated by his voice, tilting her head in a way that was almost endearing. Marcus discovered she was incredibly intelligent. When he showed her his hover truck's simple controls, she grasped the principles immediately and began sketching improvements in the dirt. Her technical knowledge was clearly advanced, though she seemed puzzled by some of humanity's more crude approaches to engineering. What impressed him most, though, was her behavior. Despite being a predator species with obvious physical advantages, she never acted threatening toward him. She was always careful to move slowly when he was nearby, kept her claws retracted when he changed her bandages, and made soft, rumbling sounds that he came to recognize as expressions of gratitude. On the fourth morning, Zara attempted to stand and walk. Marcus watched nervously as she rose to her full height, towering over him. She took a few tentative steps, then moved with increasing confidence. Her injuries were healing well, but Marcus could see she was still in pain. That afternoon, she insisted on helping with his daily chores. Despite his protests, she followed him to his vegetable garden and watched intently as he tended his plants. When she saw him struggling with a heavy water container, she simply picked it up with one hand and carried it where he needed it. Marcus found himself enjoying her company. She was a good listener, even if she couldn't understand most of what he said. Sometimes he would talk to her while he worked, telling her about his years in the asteroid mines, his decision to retire to this quiet world, his hopes for the future. She would listen attentively, occasionally making soft sounds that seemed encouraging. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire and share meals. Marcus had quickly learned that Zara was indeed carnivorous, but she seemed willing to try small portions of his plant-based foods. Her favorites were anything with strong flavors. She particularly enjoyed his coffee, though the caffeine seemed to affect her species differently, making her unusually talkative in her own language. During these quiet moments, Marcus began to piece together her story through her gestures and expressions. She had been a soldier, clearly of high rank based on her bearing and the quality of her armor. Something had gone wrong during what appeared to be a battle. Her own people had left her behind, abandoned her to die. The betrayal still hurt her deeply. Marcus could see it in the way her ears would flatten when she touched certain parts of her armor, or how her golden eyes would grow distant when she looked up at the stars. Someone she had trusted had betrayed that trust in the worst possible way. On the 5th day, Zara made her first attempt to repair her ship's communication system. Marcus watched in fascination as she worked with tools that seemed to respond to her touch like living things. Her technology was far beyond anything humans had developed. All smooth curves and surfaces that glowed with internal light. She managed to get partial power restored to one section of the ship, though the main engines were clearly beyond repair. The communication array flickered to life for a few moments before dying again. Zara's expression grew troubled as she examined the readings on displays Marcus couldn't begin to understand. That evening, she drew pictures in the dirt near their fire. Ships, lots of them, arranged in formation. She pointed to herself, then to the ships, then made a gesture across her throat. Marcus understood. Her people believed she was dead, and perhaps that was for the best. But then she drew other ships different in design. She pointed to these new drawings, then to the sky, her ears swiveling as if listening for something. These ships were coming, and she seemed both hopeful and worried about their arrival. Marcus realized that their peaceful isolation was about to end. Whoever these newcomers were, they would arrive soon. He hoped they would be friendly, but Zara's expression suggested the situation was more complicated than that. On the 6th morning, Marcus found Zara standing outside the shelter, staring up at the sky with intense concentration. Her ears were pricked forward and her tail lashed nervously. When she saw him approaching, she pointed upward and made a series of complex gestures he didn't understand. Then he heard it too, a distant humming that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The sound grew stronger throughout the day, and by afternoon even Marcus's untrained ears could tell that something large was approaching through space. Zara spent the day making preparations. She cleaned her armor as best she could and checked her weapons carefully. She also gathered several items from her crashed ship, including what appeared to be a small communication device and some kind of ceremonial object covered in intricate engravings. That evening, as they sat by their fire one last time, Zara reached into her armor and pulled out a small metallic pendant. It was beautifully crafted, depicting what looked like a stylized star surrounded by flowing patterns. She held it out to Marcus with both hands, her golden eyes serious and intent. Marcus understood. This was a gift, but more than that, it was a symbol of something important. He accepted it carefully, feeling the strange warmth of the alien metal against his palm. Zara nodded approvingly, then placed her large hand briefly on his shoulder. The gesture was gentle but unmistakably significant. Marcus had the feeling that accepting this pendant had committed him to something, though he had no idea what. As night fell, the humming in the sky grew louder. Soon Marcus could see lights moving among the stars, too regular and purposeful to be natural phenomena. Ships were indeed coming, and based on the number of lights, it was going to be quite a fleet. Zara stood and walked a short distance from the fire, positioning herself where she could be clearly seen from above. Her posture was formal, military, the bearing of a soldier preparing to face judgment. Marcus joined her, still holding the pendant she had given him. Whatever was about to happen, he had decided to face it standing beside the alien warrior who had become his friend. The lights in the sky grew brighter, and the humming became a roar that shook the ground beneath their feet. Contact was imminent, and Marcus could only hope that his week of caring for one injured alien had not inadvertently started an interstellar incident. Looking at Zara's proud, determined face in the firelight, he somehow doubted it would be that simple. The first ship descended from the star-filled sky like a falling moon. It was massive, easily the size of a city block, its hull gleaming silver in the light from Marcus's fire. The ship moved with impossible grace for something so large, settling into a hover just above the tree line. More ships followed, taking positions around the first in perfect formation. Marcus had never seen anything so beautiful or terrifying in his life. These vessels made human starships look like crude metal boxes by comparison. They seemed almost alive, their surfaces flowing and shifting as internal lights pulsed in complex patterns. Zara stood straighter as the ships arrived, her military bearing becoming even more pronounced. She touched the pendant she had given Marcus, then gestured for him to step back slightly. Whatever was about to happen, she wanted to face it first. A beam of soft blue light descended from the largest ship, and 3 figures materialized within it. As the light faded, Marcus got his first look at more of Zara's species. They were magnificent and intimidating in equal measure. The center figure was clearly the leader. He was larger than Zara, his midnight blue fur marked with silver and gold patterns that spoke of high rank. His armor was more elaborate than Zara's, inscribed with symbols that seemed to move and shift in the light. When he saw Zara alive and standing, his golden eyes widened in what was unmistakably shock. The 2 flanking him were equally impressive but clearly subordinates. One was smaller and quicker looking, with darker fur and the lean build of a scout or intelligence operative. The other was a giant even by their species standards, massive, shoulders supporting armor that looked like it could withstand artillery fire. The leader approached Zara slowly, his expression cycling through shock, relief, and something that might have been shame. He stopped several paces away and began speaking in their musical language, his words carrying tones of formality and deep emotion. Zara listened without interrupting, her tail and ears betraying nothing of her thoughts. When the leader finished, she replied in measured tones that carried an unmistakable edge of steel. Though Marcus couldn't understand the words, the meaning was clear. She was not pleased with how she had been abandoned. The conversation continued for several minutes, growing more heated as it progressed. The leader's voice became pleading, while Zara's remained coldly formal. The 2 subordinates shifted uncomfortably, clearly aware they were witnessing something significant. Finally, Zara gestured toward Marcus. The leader's gaze followed, and for the first time, he seemed to really notice the human standing nearby. His golden eyes narrowed as he took in Marcus's appearance, the medical supplies still scattered around, the makeshift shelter, and the clear evidence that this primitive alien had been caring for their lost warrior. The leader approached Marcus slowly, studying him with the intense attention of a predator evaluating potential prey. Marcus forced himself to stand still, though every instinct screamed at him to run. When the alien leader stopped just an arm's length away, towering over him like a living mountain, Marcus could smell the strange metallic scent of his advanced technology. Then Zara stepped between them. Her movement was fluid but clearly protective. She faced her superior and spoke rapidly, gesturing toward Marcus and his medical equipment. The leader's expression changed as he listened, surprise replacing suspicion. He looked back and forth between Zara and Marcus several times, as if confirming what he was being told. The smaller subordinate, the scout-like figure, suddenly became very interested in the conversation. She moved closer, examining the shelter Marcus had built and the evidence of medical treatment. When she found the empty biofoam containers and used medical supplies, she brought them to the leader with obvious excitement. A rapid discussion followed among the 3 newcomers. The giant warrior remained mostly silent, but his stance had shifted to something more respectful as he looked at Marcus. The scout was clearly explaining something important, pointing to the medical evidence and gesturing at Zara's healed wounds. Finally, the leader turned back to Marcus. To the human's surprise, the massive alien slowly lowered himself into what was obviously a formal bow. He spoke several words in his own language, then switched to heavily accented but recognizable universal standard. "Human Marcus Chen," the leader said, his voice like distant thunder. "I am War Commander Thekvalan of the Jiraki Imperial Fleet. You have preserved the life of War Captain Zarathek, heir to the 3rd bloodline, my daughter and one of our greatest warriors. This deed creates a debt of honor that cannot be easily repaid." Marcus blinked in surprise. Zara was this being's daughter, and apparently royalty of some kind. That explained her bearing and the quality of her equipment. It also explained why her abandonment had been so painful, and why her father's arrival was so emotionally charged. I just did what anyone would do, Marcus replied, feeling awkward under the intense gaze of the three aliens. She was hurt, so I helped her. The scout translated his words, and all three aliens exchanged glances that Marcus couldn't interpret. The leader straightened and spoke again. You say anyone would do such a thing. This suggests your species commonly aids wounded enemies without expectation of reward. This is not typical behavior in our experience with other races. Marcus frowned at the word enemies. She wasn't my enemy. She was injured and needed help. Why would I consider her an enemy? Again, the aliens exchanged those meaningful looks. The giant warrior spoke for the first time, his voice even deeper than his commander's. The scout translated rapidly, and the leader's expression grew thoughtful. My war chief notes that you showed no fear when we arrived, despite being vastly outmatched. You protected my daughter from potential threat, even knowing nothing of our capabilities or intentions. These are not the actions of a typical civilian of any species we know. Marcus was beginning to feel like he was missing something important. Look, I'm just a retired miner who wanted a quiet life. I found someone who needed help, so I helped. I don't understand why that's so unusual. Zara spoke up then, her voice carrying new warmth as she addressed her father. She gestured to the pendant hanging around Marcus's neck, and the leader's eyes widened again. She gave you the Star of Jiraki, he said, his voice filled with amazement. This is the highest honor our people can bestow upon an outsider. It marks you as a friend of our bloodline, protected by our honor and entitled to our aid. The pendant suddenly felt heavier around Marcus's neck. I didn't know it was that important. She just gave it to me last night. She gave it to you because you earned it, the leader replied. You preserved the life of royal blood without knowing her status, asking nothing in return. In our culture, such action creates bonds that transcend species and politics. The scout said something urgently, and the leader nodded. We have much to discuss, human Marcus Chen, but first we must address immediate concerns. My daughter's ship was attacked by the Skraldith Confederation, our enemies in the current war. They believe they killed her and will soon send scouts to confirm their victory. This world is no longer safe. Marcus felt his peaceful retirement slipping away entirely. War? What war? The war that my daughter was fighting when her own wingmates abandoned her to die, the leader said grimly. A war that has just gained a new dimension, thanks to your kindness to a stranger. As if summoned by his words, bright lights appeared at the edge of the system. More ships were coming, but these moved with the aggressive speed of military vessels in pursuit. The war commander's expression hardened. The Skraldith arrive earlier than expected. We must leave immediately. Wait, Marcus said, looking at his small homestead, his garden, everything he had built for his retirement. What about my home? My life here? Zara stepped closer and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. In her broken universal standard, she spoke the words that would change everything. You saved Jiraki Princess. Now Jiraki save human friend. Come with us, Marcus Chen. Adventure begins. The war commander gestured toward his ship, where the transport beam was already powering up. Choose quickly, human. Stay and face the enemy, or come with us and discover what happens when humanity meets the wider galaxy. Marcus looked at his garden one last time, then at the alien warrior who had become his friend, and the family that had come to reclaim her. The approaching enemy ships were growing brighter by the moment. It wasn't really a choice at all. I'm coming, he said, and stepped into the light that would carry him to the stars. The transport beam was unlike anything Marcus had ever experienced. One moment he was standing on familiar ground beside his ruined garden. The next he was materializing inside what could only be described as a palace that flew among the stars. The ship's interior was vast and elegant, all flowing curves and surfaces that glowed with gentle internal light. Zara steadied him as he stumbled slightly, still adjusting to the sensation of teleportation. Her father, War Commander Feline, was already moving toward what appeared to be a command center, barking orders in their musical language. Through massive transparent panels that must have been viewports, Marcus could see his former homeworld falling away as the fleet accelerated. The enemy arrives in minutes, Feline explained without looking back. We will jump to hyperspace once we clear the gravity well. Your world will be safe, human Marcus. The Skrultith have no interest in primitive colonies. Marcus felt a pang at hearing his carefully chosen home described as primitive, but he had to admit the description was accurate from their perspective. These aliens had technology that made humanity's greatest achievements look like stone tools. Zara guided him to an alcove, where he could observe without interfering. The ship's crew moved with practiced efficiency, preparing for what was clearly a strategic withdrawal rather than a retreat. These weren't beings fleeing in panic. They were professionals executing a planned maneuver. The enemy ships reached the outer system just as the Jiraki fleet finished its preparations. Through the viewports, Marcus caught a glimpse of vessels that were distinctly different from the elegant curves of Zara's people. The Skrultith ships were angular and aggressive, all sharp edges and weapon ports that spoke of a purely military aesthetic. They seek confirmation of War Captain Zarathek's death, the giant warrior reported, his words translated by a device that rendered his voice into universal standard. Their scanning patterns suggest they expect to find only wreckage. Thekvalan's expression carried grim satisfaction. Let them search. They will find her ship, damaged beyond recovery. By the time they realize what actually happened, we will be far from here. The fleet jumped to hyperspace with a sensation Marcus felt rather than heard, a deep thrumming that seemed to resonate in his bones. The stars outside shifted from points of light to streaks of brilliance, then stabilized into the swirling patterns of faster-than-light travel. With immediate danger past, Thekvalan finally turned his full attention to Marcus. The war commander was even more impressive up close, his armor inscribed with symbols that seemed to move and change as Marcus watched. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Human Marcus Chen, you have been brought aboard the flagship of the 3rd Imperial Battle Fleet. You are now under the protection of House Jiraki, but you are also far from your own people and deep in the middle of a war zone. I must ask what you wish us to do with you. Marcus considered the question seriously. I don't really know enough about the situation to make an informed decision. Maybe you could start by explaining this war and how Zara ended up abandoned and dying on my world. Zara's ears flattened slightly at the mention of her abandonment, and her father's expression darkened. The scout who Marcus had learned was called Sektar, hissed something that definitely sounded like a curse. The war began 3 cycles ago, Thekvalan explained, when the Skrultith Confederation attempted to claim exclusive mining rights to the Viridian Nebula. The nebula contains deposits of quantum-grade crystals essential for our most advanced technology. When diplomatic negotiations failed, they resorted to military action. The war commander gestured, and holographic displays materialized in the air around them, showing star maps and fleet positions with stunning detail. The conflict has been deadlocked for months. Both sides are roughly equal in strength, and neither can gain a decisive advantage. That changed 2 days ago, Sektar added, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. Intelligence suggested that a Skrultith supply convoy would pass through the Kepler system. War Captain Zarathek volunteered to lead a reconnaissance mission to gather information about their new weapon systems. Zara spoke for the first time since boarding, her universal standard improving rapidly as she listened to the others. Mission parameters were simple. Observe, record, withdraw. No engagement unless discovered. What went wrong? Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew from the expressions around him. Betrayal, the giant warrior rumbled. Someone provided the enemy with details of the mission. They were waiting in ambush. Thekvalan's claws extended slightly, a clear sign of barely contained rage. My daughter's wingmates panicked when the trap was sprung. Instead of fighting their way out together, they abandoned her to cover their own escape. They reported her as killed in action to avoid admitting their cowardice. Marcus looked at Zara, seeing her composed exterior in a new light. She hadn't just been abandoned by her comrades. She had been betrayed by people she trusted and then written off as an acceptable loss. The fact that she had survived at all was remarkable. So when you found her ship crashed on my world, Marcus said slowly, you thought you were coming to recover her body. We came to recover her body and investigate how the enemy had learned of our mission, Sektar confirmed. Instead, we found her alive and under the protection of a species we had never encountered. A species that apparently helps wounded strangers without considering the potential consequences. Something in the way she said it made Marcus look around the group more carefully. All four aliens were watching him with expressions he couldn't quite read. There was respect there, but also something that might have been calculation. "You keep acting like what I did was unusual," Marcus said. "Most humans would have done the same thing." "Most humans," Feline repeated thoughtfully. "Tell me, Marcus Chen, how many of your people live on that world?" "Just me. I chose it specifically because it was uninhabited and peaceful." "And how many humans are there in total?" Marcus had to think about it. "Maybe 40 billion? Spread across about 100 colonies in Earth itself." The silence that followed was profound. The four aliens exchanged glances that carried entire conversations. Finally, Feline spoke again. 40 billion individuals of a species that routinely aids wounded strangers," he said slowly. 40 billion beings who apparently choose peace over conquest when given the option. "Some of us do," Marcus corrected. "Humans aren't perfect. We have our share of violence and selfishness. But yes, most of us try to help when we can." Sektar was practically vibrating with excitement. "War Commander, if even half of what he says is accurate, the implications are staggering. A species that values individual life above tribal loyalty, that aids enemies without expectation of reward, that chooses peaceful isolation over territorial expansion. A species," the giant warrior added thoughtfully, "that the Skrultith know nothing about." Marcus was beginning to feel like he was missing something important again. "What exactly are you all thinking?" Feline moved to the holographic displays and began manipulating them with practiced ease. "You said your people have 100 colonies, Marcus Chen. Are they defended?" "We have some military forces, but nothing like what I've seen here. Most of our colonies are protected by distance and the fact that we don't bother anyone." "And your technology level?" "Fusion power, basic faster-than-light travel, limited energy weapons. Nothing that would threaten a species like yours." The war commander nodded slowly. "In other words, your people are currently defenseless against either side in this war, but they represent a potential resource that could tip the balance of power." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "Resource? What kind of resource?" "Manpower," Zara said quietly. 40 billion beings who could be enslaved, conscripted, or simply eliminated to prevent the other side from using them. But, Sektar added with growing excitement, also 40 billion potential allies who might choose to help those who protect them from such a fate. Marcus stared at the aliens around him, finally understanding what they were really discussing. His simple act of kindness hadn't just saved one life. It had potentially introduced an entirely new factor into an interstellar war. "You want to recruit humanity," he said. "We want to offer humanity a choice," Feline corrected. "Join with us as allies and receive our protection and technology, or remain neutral and risk eventual discovery by the Skrultith, who are far less interested in honorable alliances." The war commander leaned forward, his golden eyes intense. "But first, we need to know if what you've shown us is truly representative of your species. We need to know if humans can be trusted, and if they can be taught to fight when fighting becomes necessary." Marcus looked out at the swirling patterns of hyperspace, thinking of his quiet garden and his simple retirement that now seemed like a lifetime ago. "Where are we going?" he asked. "To the front lines," Feline replied, "where you will have a chance to see this war up close, and where we will learn whether humanity has what it takes to survive in a galaxy where kindness to strangers can change the fate of civilizations." The Jaraki fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of a system that had clearly seen better days. Through the massive viewports of the flagship, Marcus could see the scattered debris of what had once been mining stations and orbital platforms. In the distance, two groups of warships faced each other across the void, their weapons powered but not yet firing. "The Altair system," War Commander Feline explained, gesturing toward the tactical displays that showed the disposition of forces. "The Skrultith took it last month, but they haven't had time to fully fortify their position. We're here to test their defenses and gather intelligence on their new weapon systems." Marcus studied the enemy ships through enhanced scopes that Sektar had provided him. The Skrultith vessels were as ugly as they were dangerous, all brutal angles and oversized weapon arrays. They looked like they had been designed by someone who understood only violence. "What do they look like?" he asked. "The Skrultith, I mean." "Imagine your species but larger and covered in bony plates," Zara replied. She had recovered completely from her injuries and was back in proper military armor, looking every inch the royal warrior. They evolved from pack hunters, but unlike my people, they never learned to value individual honor above group survival. They are efficient killers, the giant warrior, whose name Marcus had learned was Kethdar, added approvingly. But they lack imagination in their tactics. They rely on overwhelming force and superior numbers. As if summoned by their discussion, the Skrultith fleet began to move. A dozen of their ships broke formation and accelerated toward the Jiraki position, their weapons charging with visible energy buildup. Standard response, Feline observed calmly. They send a probing force to test our readiness while keeping their main fleet in reserve. Predictable. Marcus watched in fascination as the battle unfolded. The Jiraki ships moved like dancers, their formation flowing and shifting to present optimal firing angles, while minimizing their exposure to enemy weapons. Energy beams lanced between the opposing forces, creating brief stars in the darkness of space. Your people fight like artists, Marcus commented, watching one Jiraki cruiser execute a maneuver that shouldn't have been possible with conventional physics. We fight like warriors who understand that victory without honor is meaningless, Zara replied. Observe the Skrultith formation. What do you see? Marcus studied the enemy ships more carefully. They were advancing in a rigid wedge formation, concentrating their fire on single targets and overwhelming them through sheer destructive power. It was effective but brutal, leaving no room for individual initiative or creative tactics. They're very organized, he said, but they don't seem to adapt when things don't go according to plan. Exactly, Sektar said with approval. They excel at prepared positions and predetermined strategies, but they struggle when faced with unexpected challenges. This is why the war has reached stalemate. Our forces are too adaptable to be easily defeated, but their numbers are too great for us to achieve decisive victory. The battle continued for several hours, with both sides testing each other's capabilities without committing to a full engagement. Marcus noticed that despite the spectacular light show, actual casualties seemed surprisingly light. This was warfare as strategic chess match rather than simple slaughter. Is it always like this? He asked. Recently, yes, Feline replied with obvious frustration. Both sides have learned to avoid decisive battles because the cost is too high. We probe, they respond, we withdraw, they consolidate. Neither side can afford the losses that would come from a true commitment to battle. As if to prove his point, the Skrultith probing force began to withdraw after achieving what were apparently their intelligence objectives. The Jiraki ships let them go, having gathered intelligence of their own. And this is where your people could change everything, Sektar said, turning to Marcus with undisguised excitement. Both sides need fresh resources, new strategies, innovative thinking. Humanity could provide all of these things. Marcus was beginning to see the shape of their offer more clearly. You're not just looking for allies. You're looking for someone who can break the stalemate. We're looking for someone worthy of the honor that comes with true alliance, Feline corrected. The Jiraki do not accept partners, we accept family. But family must prove they can stand with us when standing becomes necessary. Over the next few days, Marcus was given a crash course in galactic politics and warfare. He learned that the current conflict was just the latest in a series of territorial disputes that had shaped this region of space for centuries. The Skrultith were expansionist by nature, constantly seeking new resources and territory. The Jiraki and their allies formed a loose confederation dedicated to maintaining the balance of power. But the balance is failing, Sektar explained during one of their strategy sessions. The Skrultith have grown stronger with each conquest, while our alliance has grown more cautious. We need something to tip the scales. Marcus spent hours studying their technology, their tactics, their history. The Jiraki were clearly the more advanced species, but their culture emphasized individual excellence over mass production. They built fewer ships, but each one was a work of art that could outfight multiple enemy vessels. The problem was that the Skrultith were willing to accept casualties that would be unthinkable to their more honor-bound opponents. It's a war between quality and quantity, Marcus observed during a briefing. And quantity has been winning through simple attrition. An astute analysis, Feline agreed. Which brings us to the question of your people's potential contribution. You have spoken of 40 billion humans. If even a small percentage were willing to serve alongside us, the numbers alone would be significant. But it's not just about numbers, Zara added. You showed compassion to a wounded enemy, creativity in your medical treatment, courage when faced with the unknown. These are qualities that could transform how this war is fought. Marcus thought about Earth, about the colonies spread across human space, about people who had never imagined that alien civilizations were fighting wars among the stars. My people would need to understand what they were getting into. This isn't just about joining an alliance, it's about choosing sides in someone else's war. Not someone else's war, Kethdar rumbled. Soon it will be everyone's war. The Skrultith will not stop with us. If they achieve dominance here, they will expand further. Your colonies will eventually be discovered. And when they are, you will face the same choice we offer now, but with far fewer options. The truth of that statement was uncomfortable, but undeniable. Humanity's isolation was temporary at best. They would eventually encounter other species, and when they did, having powerful allies could mean the difference between survival and extinction. What exactly are you proposing? Marcus asked. Feline activated the holographic displays showing star charts that included human space for the first time. A formal alliance between the Jaraki Empire and the human colonies. We provide advanced technology, military protection, and access to galactic trade networks. In return, humanity provides resources, personnel, and most importantly, fresh perspectives on how to resolve this conflict. And if my people refuse? Then we respect their choice and ensure that your existence remains secret for as long as possible. The war commander replied. But Marcus Chen, you have seen what we face. Can you honestly tell me that isolation will protect your people forever? Marcus stared at the star charts, seeing human colonies marked as vulnerable points in a galaxy that was far more dangerous than anyone on Earth imagined. His simple desire for a quiet retirement had led him into the middle of decisions that could affect the future of his entire species. I would need to speak for my people, he said finally. I would need to go back to human space and present your offer to the proper authorities. Of course, Feline agreed. But first, you should see more of what this alliance would mean. You should understand both the benefits and the costs of standing with us. The war commander gestured toward the viewports, where another Skrultith fleet was approaching the system's edge. This one was larger than the previous probe, clearly intended for more serious engagement. You spoke of wanting to understand the situation before making decisions, Zara said, moving to stand beside him at the viewport. This will be your chance to see how both sides fight when the stakes are real. Marcus watched the approaching enemy fleet, noting its size and aggressive formation. This wasn't going to be another careful probe. This was going to be a real battle, with real casualties on both sides. Will you fight alongside us, Marcus Chen? Feline asked quietly. Not as a warrior, you are not trained for that, but as an observer and advisor. Help us understand how your people might approach this problem differently. Marcus looked around at the aliens who had become his friends, thinking of Zara bleeding in her crashed ship and his simple decision to help a stranger. That decision had brought him here to this moment, to this choice that could change everything. Yes, he said, I'll stand with you. Outside, the enemy fleet continued its approach, and Marcus prepared to witness his first real battle among the stars. The battle that followed would be remembered as the turning point in the Jaraki-Skrultith War, though not for the reasons anyone expected. Marcus stood in the command center, watching as both fleets maneuvered for advantage. The Skrultith had committed nearly 50 ships to this assault, while the Jaraki had only 20 vessels available. The mathematics seemed straightforward and brutal. Standard defensive formation, War Commander Feline ordered, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had fought dozens of similar battles. Let them come to us and bleed them as they advance. But as Marcus watched the tactical displays, he began to notice something that seemed to have escaped the attention of the professional warriors around him. The Skrultith formation was indeed predictable, but it was also vulnerable in ways that the Jaraki weren't exploiting. Excuse me, he said tentatively. But why aren't you targeting their command ship? Sektar looked up from her intelligence console. Their flagship is heavily armored and protected by screening vessels. Attempting to reach it would cost us ships we cannot afford to lose. But it's also the center of their formation, Marcus pointed out. If something happened to it, wouldn't the rest of their fleet lose coordination? Zara's ears swiveled toward him with interest. Explain your thinking, Marcus Chen. Marcus moved to the holographic display, noting how the Skrultith ships maintained precise positions relative to their flagship. You said they rely on predetermined strategies and have trouble adapting. What if their flagship isn't just commanding the fleet, but actually controlling it, like a hive mind? Kethdar rumbled thoughtfully. An interesting hypothesis. Their recent formations have shown increased coordination beyond their historical capabilities. If that's true, Marcus continued, gaining confidence as the idea developed, then you don't need to destroy the flagship. You just need to disrupt its communications. Cut off the head and the body won't know what to do. The bridge fell silent as the implications sank in. Feline studied the enemy formation with new eyes, seeing the rigid positioning and synchronized movements that spoke of centralized control rather than individual ship initiative. How would you suggest we test this theory? The war commander asked. Marcus pointed to a cluster of smaller Skrulteth vessels on the fleet's flank. Hit those ships with everything you have, but target their communication arrays specifically. If I'm right, they'll lose coordination with the main fleet and either have to operate independently or fall back to rejoin the formation. And if you're wrong, then you've eliminated some enemy ships and learned something about their capabilities. But if I'm right, you've found their weakness. Feline considered for a moment, then began issuing new orders. 3 Jiraki cruisers broke from the main formation and accelerated toward the target vessels, their weapons focusing on the sensor and communication arrays that Marcus had identified. The results were immediate and dramatic. As their communications were severed, the targeted Skrulteth ships began to show confusion. Their tight formation wavered, and 2 vessels actually collided as they tried to maintain position without proper coordination. Within minutes, the entire squadron was falling back in disorder. Remarkable, Sektar breathed, watching the tactical analysis update in real time. Their coordination index has dropped by 60% in the affected sector. But the real test came when the main Skrulteth fleet tried to compensate. Instead of adapting their strategy to account for the lost squadron, they rigidly maintained their original formation, leaving a glaring gap in their battle line. They can't adjust, Zara observed with growing excitement. The flagship is locked into its predetermined strategy and cannot adapt to changed circumstances. Marcus felt a surge of nervous energy, then hit their communications directly, not to destroy the flagship but to blind it temporarily, make it lose contact with its fleet for just a few minutes. And then you show them something they've never seen before. You show them how unpredictable tactics work. What followed was unlike any space battle in recorded history. Using information that Marcus had learned from his years in asteroid mining, the Jiraki fleet executed maneuvers that would have been impossible with conventional military thinking. They used gravitational fields from nearby planets to slingshot around the enemy formation. They coordinated attacks from multiple vectors simultaneously. They even used debris from destroyed mining platforms as improvised weapons. The Skrulteth, cut off from their centralized command structure, struggled to respond to tactics they had never encountered. Ships designed to fight in rigid formations found themselves isolated and overwhelmed by enemies who refused to follow predictable patterns. How did you know to do this? Feline asked as they watched enemy vessels retreating in confusion. Where I come from, we call it thinking outside the box, Marcus replied. Humans have had to be adaptable to survive. We've never had the luxury of overwhelming technological superiority, so we learned to be creative instead. The battle ended with the Skrulteth fleet in full retreat, having lost nearly half their vessels without achieving any of their objectives. More importantly, the Jiraki had captured several enemy ships intact, providing intelligence that could change the entire course of the war. In the days that followed, word of the victory spread throughout Jiraki space. But more than the tactical success, it was the method of victory that captured attention. A primitive alien, with no military training and technology centuries behind their own, had identified weaknesses that experienced warriors had missed. Your people possess something we had not anticipated, Feline admitted during a private conversation with Marcus. The ability to see problems from perspectives we cannot imagine. This is worth more than any number of ships or weapons. Marcus found himself the center of intense interest from Jiraki strategists and scientists. They wanted to understand human cognitive patterns, learning methodologies, even cultural approaches to problem solving. What they discovered was that humanity's greatest strength wasn't technology or military might, but adaptability born from diversity and necessity. On Earth, Marcus explained to a gathering of war planners, we have hundreds of different cultures, each with their own ways of approaching problems. We've learned that the best solutions often come from combining different perspectives. No single way of thinking is always right. The implications were staggering. The Jiraki, for all their honor and individual excellence, had become trapped in their own cultural assumptions. The Skraldeth were even worse, locked into rigid hierarchies that prevented creative thinking. Humanity offered something neither side had: the ability to approach problems without predetermined assumptions. "We want to formalize our offer," Feline announced as they prepared to return Marcus to human space. "Not just alliance, but true partnership. The Jiraki Empire would like to propose a cultural and technological exchange with humanity." Marcus thought about his quiet garden, his simple retirement plan, and how completely his life had changed. "I can present your offer to my people, but I can't speak for all of humanity. We don't have a single government or leader. That diversity is part of what makes you valuable," Zara pointed out. She was back to her role as war captain, but their friendship remained. "We don't want to change humanity, we want to learn from it." As they prepared for the jump back to human space, Marcus realized that his simple act of kindness had indeed changed everything. Not just for him, but potentially for his entire species and their place in the galaxy. The pendant Zara had given him felt warm against his chest, a reminder that sometimes the most important decisions begin with the simplest choices. He had chosen to help a wounded stranger, and that choice had opened up possibilities he never could have imagined. Now he faced an even more significant choice: how to present humanity's potential to the galaxy, and how to help his species navigate the complex realities of interstellar politics. The quiet retirement he had planned was gone forever, replaced by a role he had never sought but couldn't abandon. As the Jiraki fleet jumped to hyperspace, carrying him home with an offer that could transform human civilization, Marcus smiled. Sometimes the most important adventures began with the smallest acts of compassion, and sometimes feeding a wounded stranger could change the fate of worlds. The galaxy was about to discover what happened when humanity joined the larger community of sentient species. Marcus just hoped his people were ready for the adventure that awaited them among the stars.